All right. Let me find the start button. Where start webinar? There we go. We can do it. Let me find my participants button. There we go. And we've got folks rolling on in. And hey, welcome to the Architect's Edge Live, our special VKS, all the things, study paper. We got so many what's the word I'm looking for? Experts, subject matter experts, masters of their own destiny, and all the things. As so many of you happen to be rolling in right now. I am, as you can probably see, Christopher Kusek, the head of Architect's Edge, former CTO, former architect, principled about this or that, and lately these days rocking it as an adoption manager. I've got with us an amazing cast of characters, starting with Bryan Sullins. Say hello, Bryan. Give us a little bit of background around you. Hey,
Hello. Yeah, making sure everything lights up here. Yeah, no, yeah, appreciate it. It's good to be here. I've been at VMware by Broadcom almost 4 years now, and before that, I actually was a platform engineer. So I feel like I can help out with talking about these things from a real world perspective. And I'm assuming that's why you called me, but yeah, there's that. So yeah, it's good to be here.
yes, Christopher Catano. Tell us
Yeah,
about
thanks.
yourself.
Pleasure to be on again. Yeah, my background's around modern applications, currently focusing on private AI and all of the fun things AI related, supporting the Broadcom Business West for VMware, and looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks, Christopher.
That's awesome. William, tell us about yourself. You are our VKS guy. You are our resident VKS guy, aren't you?
Yes, I do VKS things all day, every day. Yeah, I'm a solution architect. I'm also in the West, just like Chris. And I've been at VMware, came through pivotal acquisition of VMware into Broadcom, been doing modern apps stuff in Kubernetes for a long time. Prior to that, I was building platforms before we had the term platform engineer and building them on Kubernetes. And prior to that, like Docker, Swarm, and all the other things around that. So been kind of playing in this Kubernetes space for a while.
You've been around the block. We've that's the best part is this whole panel is folks who've been around the block. We're gonna be talking about so many things. I want to definitely encourage you, take advantage of the chat button for chat. But if you've got questions you actually want answers to, use the Q&A. So that way there's kind of a level of accountability to people being able to read and respond to those things inside the Q&A. The resources button is going to be your best friend and savior in the world for all the things we're going to be talking about. And speaking of resources, Bryan, why don't you kick us off with your slides? Let's go through some slides and such like that. We'll go through that.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. I do want to make sure that we talk about the fact that the context we have is the study. So, did you want to bring the poll out now, or did you want
I
to wait for
am
that?
trying to find that button. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That is the Where's the start poll button? I'm working on it. You
All
go
right,
ahead and
it's cool.
start because
Well,
it'll
yeah,
pop over the in the background. So you go ahead and kick things off.
I'll just jump right in, and I want to make sure that we at least make a nod to the
There we go.
context for the talk that we have here today, which is the study kind of proved out that VKS was faster than bare metal, which gives us an opportunity to really talk about, ultimately VKS and whatnot. So my job really is to level set, kind of give you an idea of what we're really talking about with VKS and what we're really talking about with, and kind of the why, about, why the study proved out, in this case, that VKS was faster than bare metal, in this case. And there's a nice little meme that I came up with for this, because this is old school Jurassic Park, the original, and we all know what happened after that. So I just want to put that out there, and I really just want to kind of come out swinging with the story that I talk to a lot of sort of traditional infrastructure engineers, and many of them are going by some erroneous and assumptions that are of a bygone era. So level setting and the story that I want to tell, and sort of the thing that I warn people. And by the way, this isn't just a vendor thing. This is really a technologist thing, which is I see a lot of people who would ordinarily know better who just make these bad assumptions that like, okay, well, I introduce a certain, overlay, so that's going to incur overhead, and overhead always equals some sort of a performance hit, and that's just simply not true. And my plea and my story here that I am asking of anybody on this call who is attending this is to not just go through and make these assumptions without evaluating various platforms, especially ours. But good architecture and good platform engineering design means looking at multiple factors outside of performance, which would include management overhead, the cost of maintenance, and the cost overall of running the various platforms. As you'll see here in a bit, that we have some distinct competitive advantages there. And I want to make sure everybody understands what we're not saying. Nobody on this call is making the claim that bare metal is always slower, but we are making the claim that it is not always faster. And when you take a look at these various multiple factors, and you'll see some of the stories that I'm going to tell as part of this, your job could be at stake if you make these erroneous assumptions and unnecessarily cost the business that you work for money unnecessarily. So that is, point one. Point two is this myth that I'm trying to bust, which is bare metal is always faster than virtualization. And notice I'm using the term virtualization. Am, of course, am going to purport and state that our virtualization platform on vSphere is the fastest performing. But I still find that, and here's my theory, and anybody else in the panel can chime in on this. And, why do people think this? Why do people think that, and they sort of bypass anything related to virtualization and in vSphere in this case, they just bypass it and just make these erroneous assumptions. Well, bare metal is always going to be faster, so we need to do that. And there's some implications there that are that could get you in a lot of trouble. But my theory, and this is it, is that there's an additional myth that layers of abstraction, and I know that's loosely defined. So think about like the virtualization layer or various layers that people think might incur some level of overhead that would then influence performance. That is really another myth to make that particular assumption. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I am saying that if you take a look at the history of all things related to hardware vendors over the past 20 to 30 years, optimizing their hardware for virtualization as a technology. You take a look at our platform and the patents that we have on pretty much every resource. We have, relaxed co-scheduling with the CPU. We have patents on memory allocation, all these various things that ultimately lead to the fact that if there is a performance hit, it's usually in the low single digits, if there is one at all. A lot of times we go even keel. A lot of times, like in the case with the study, which we encourage you to take a look at and see how that was performed. A lot of times we're better. And again, I am not saying that we're always going to be faster than insert platform X here. All we're asking for, and all any vendor could ask for, is at least a seat at the table and at least some sort of an evaluative process where you go through and take a look at our platform and see, all things being equal and all things considered. Remember, we have other things to consider outside of just simply performance. If your users aren't going to notice, then really it's an argument over which one is the best and easiest platform to maintain and what features does it provide overall that will lead to a positive and good outcome overall.
So on that for a second, Bryan, we'll note is in addition to the performance study, there's also a drop in there, which was the administration study and the ease of administration compared to maybe not so easy of administration. So that's definitely one of the other resources to check out. You go back to your slides, but I just wanted to
it's cool.
chime in about that.
Yeah, because that is part, again, going over all things, looking at all the different factors, you'll see kind of why that's important. While I'm at it, and this is sort of adjacent to, sort of indirectly related to this whole idea of bare metal, most Kubernetes clusters run on virtualized platforms by default. And I say this because, again, I talk to engineers on the daily. So I'm a VCF solutions architect, and VKS is a thing that I have a big passion about because, like I said, I used to be a platform engineer once upon a time before that was a thing, before it was called that. But I talk to even C-level people. I talk to even technical people who are under the erroneous assumption that when they put something out in EKS on AWS or AKS out in Azure, they think that it runs on bare metal. It absolutely does not. There's no real architectural or performance advantage out of the gate by doing it on those particular platforms. So if you my plea here is again to try to get people to look at our platform as on at least the same level as those. That's why we named it, our marketing people named it VKS. I would imagine, I'm not a marketing person, it's beyond my pay grade. But I'm assuming that we wanted to ensure that we had the psychology of, hey, all of the things that you know about running Kubernetes, we have that too, and we'll talk about those distinct advantages over and above that as well. Also, any Kubernetes running on top of VCF. So think about like DIY Kubernetes or some of the other like on-prem, competing products. So again, I know this is probably, repetitive, but evaluate the options before acting on bad assumptions without evidence, and your job is at stake here. So I have seen architects either be fired or get in trouble for just saying, well, we need to go out and spend, $3 million on hardware. We need to spend another, $1 or $2 million on purchasing support. We need to, increase our headcount because we've got to implement a whole different and separate hardware platform for implementing this, when you haven't even looked at the fact that maybe if there is a performance hit, maybe your users won't even notice. So what I'm really asking for is for everybody to really just do your homework. Take a look at what we offer, take a look at what we provide, and ensure that you are considering all those various things based on the business needs and the applications needs of your environment.
I mean, to be fair, Bryan, we're no stranger to, hey, we want to take advantage of, at the time it was the new and shiny, the new features and the new capabilities of containers or Kubernetes or, Docker, when these things first hit the road. And while the answer could have been, and sometimes should have been, hey, use the existing infrastructure, the infrastructure as a service that you're running on today. Sometimes people didn't lean that, oh, we want to do this. Well, it can only be done in this particular way because we're told that, or I read that on a Reddit forum or something. Therefore, I go and I spend a whole lot of money on hardware, a lot of money on software, and a lot of money on training individuals just so I can try to do something that I'm doing every day. And to be fair, if you were doing this 5 or 10 years ago, what you were doing at the time was probably the right thing at the time, right? Yeah. It's, the evolution of VKS from the journey that got us to it being called VKS has been a long journey, but it continues to make the platform better and, more performant and more available and better to the audience, as seen by that performance study, right? Yeah. So that's kind of, and it's equally to the point of the administration study, because a lot of the end users, I mean, you guys tell me in the chat, do you want to spend your time administering the platform that you run your containers on, or do you want to spend the time developing the applications that you run your containers inside of, right? Because that's kind of the key part, is which hat do you wear and how many hats are you forced to wear in order to just maintain and operate this environment?
Christopher, that's the point I was going to make in not getting lost too much in, like, yes, absolutely focusing in on the performance of the solution and the platform, but what really matters is the performance of the team and supporting the business and the outcomes. And so when you think about Kubernetes, very generally talking about modern applications, software development, and what matters there is time to market and velocity. So, when you think about virtualization in general, having multi-tenancy, being able to onboard and offboard teams quickly, being able to go through your landscape from dev, test, user acceptance, all the way up to production in a way that's consistent and fits within your corporate policies and governance rules, all that good stuff. Those are all the things that help you get things done quickly and responsibly. And so, like, when you look at some of our customers that we support who have, a couple of them out there are very contract based. And so they go bid on contracts, they get those contracts, they have to build the software that supports them and then turn that over. And they don't get paid until they do that. Mm-hmm. And so the velocity, the quality, and the amount of contracts you can do per year directly impact the bottom line and health of the business. And so If they cannot get a project started, or if it takes 3 months to get resources in place and teams onboarded and access in place, that's money lost. And again, all of that goes back to kind of what you look at with the private cloud.
I
Well,
think this is,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think when we look at this kind of area around, I mean, you have performance. Obviously, we want good performance for our applications. Then we have the application layer, and we need to deliver, as you were saying, kind of business value quickly, let developers write code, not spend a bunch of time on the underlying components. I mean, that goes back to the old story of the value line and all these things that have been talked about for years. And this really boils down, in my opinion, to how easy it is in kind of the at least ecosystem that we're talking about right now, which is Kubernetes. How easy is it to get these environments for the development teams? How easy is it to maintain, upgrade those environments? How easy is it to isolate those environments? How easy is it to migrate them? All of these components come down to, like, if you're looking at something like bare metal, I mean, this came up recently with some folks I was talking to, is like, how long does it take to get a new cluster up and running for a dev team? Right? That can directly be correlated to a lot of things Chris was just saying and Bryan was just saying. Like, if I'm an administrator and I can say I need a new Kubernetes cluster on a fresh isolated network, with all of my components installed, and I can get that in 10 minutes, like end to end, zero to full blown cluster with dev access in 10 minutes. Can you do that by going and racking and stacking hardware and installing things on it? Like, I'm sure there are some people out there that can do it, but that's not maybe the
I'm
majority.
I'm smiling because you're stealing my thunder, Will. It's fine though. We're all a
Sorry.
team here. It's okay. Um, yeah, cool, man. Love the discussion. I only have really two more slides, and then we'll go back to and ensure that we're doing this in a more of a discussion way. But I just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about, and to Will's point about the ease of implementation. What we're really talking about is like a VMware Kubernetes service, or vSphere Kubernetes service, is really what it is. And in order to do this, you leverage what's called the supervisor, and the supervisor unlocks a bunch of different things. VKS is only one of them. And this is a thing, by the way, talk about ease of implementation and ease of use, is this is a thing that you can install if you are running vSphere 8 U3. I would contact your account team before you start down the journey, because you want to ensure that you have some methodology of looking at this in the long term of moving forward with like VCF 9, for example. But if you're running vSphere 8 U3, you can get started on this tomorrow, and it costs you nothing but your time. And this is possibly in your vSphere right now. You just go into the burger menu in the upper left-hand corner, you go down to workload management, and off you go. So that is really what we are talking about here. And again, one of the advantages that we have compared to some of these other platforms outside of, as we can see with performance, is the ease of implementation and the low cost. And really, what does that mean once you're up and running with VKS? Some of the things that, again, this is sort of myth busting, and you have a lot of assumption that people might have about, hey, does that mean that, VMware is new to this game? And the answer is no, as Will can attest to, because he's been doing this, with Pivotal before that, and now with VMware and Broadcom. We are the number 3 contributor to the Kubernetes code base. There are a lot of very well-known open source and CNCF projects that we started and then open source, including stuff like Harbor. We were the first to do Cluster API, which is the recommended method from the Kubergensia, we'll call it, on how to run all things related to Kubernetes. We were the first to do that. And we'll talk a lot more about the CNCF stuff coming up. But I used to work with a lot of platform engineers who were very like DIY focused and open source focused, and how dare these vendors try to get in on this game here. But you have to understand that we include a lot of these very well-known things, to where if you start logging into a VKS Kubernetes cluster, it's all stuff that is very well known to you, and very familiar, and things that you can just get started with a kubectl command. right off the bat, and that's very, very important, especially in our line of work. Anything else the panel wants to talk about here?
I do want to talk about something at least. There was a great question that was asked in the Q&A, and KK did a great job of answering it. But I want to highlight that for anyone who's not aware of this, everything that Bryan is saying, I mean, it's perfect if you're not running VKS today. But in the case of the question being, hey, if I'm running 3.4 today, is it going to break things to go to 3.6? The answer, the KK, no, it's not going to break things. So not only does it not break your environment to deploy and start, getting familiar with running these things today. Obviously, if you want to get your feet wet before you get your infrastructure wet, you just go use the hands-on labs because that's a great place to learn about this, right? Or VCF learning education, right? But aside from that, there's no big blockers to prevent you from upgrading from a version you may be running today to the latest and greatest version that may be available. So just know that there's a lot of options at your disposal too. I mean, which was a great question there in the chat or in the Q&A. Now there's more questions coming in, so I'll hand it back to you. Brian. Go look at those.
While we're on the topic of like the learning and the hands-on lab stuff, we also have the VKS Experience Day, which is a free hands-on lab / guided. It's a full day experience. I just took it last Friday as part of our requirements here as essays, and what I loved about the content there is it really does cater to platform engineers. So it goes through and talks about, setting up Harbor, setting up Argo CD, doing kind of a CI/CD pipeline there. So you get a lot of familiarity with literally what we're talking about. So I have two more. This is what I call icons that platform engineers would find familiar, part 1. And getting back to this whole idea of it's supported, this is included with VCF, and this is kitchen synced CNCF conformant enterprise grade Kubernetes on VCF. So I get a lot of concerns that people have that are, I understand them, but they're not founded in that, oh, well, once I get into this, then that means I'm locked in. And the answer is no. We have the flexibility and the same level of flexibility you'd expect on any Kubernetes platform. So any vendor is going to make certain decisions about what they provide in their Kubernetes cluster. And these are all icons that typically people will recognize and understand and be like, okay, cool. Whenever I talk about this, I typically have platform engineers or Kubernetes engineers or people who are highly familiar with Kubernetes. They're like, okay, cool. I get it. I understand this. I get this. I know, your CNI, the CNI that you provide, CSI, we have our registry service. But I want to implore you, and I want to make sure that everybody understands, like, that doesn't mean you're locked into those particular things. These are just the things that we provide out of the box and that we support, which, by the way, support is also a big deal when it comes to costs. Since this is all included in our platform, the support as well, these are all things that you can stand up. You would log into our VKS cluster once it stood up, and it would be a very familiar thing like you would on any other, Kubernetes platform. We're going to, of course, state that ours is better, but I just want to make sure that people understand that we don't put this sort of vendor spin on it to where we're attempting to lock you in. Everything that I've seen in my experience with this, even as a customer, we're very like, you have the flexibility, and flexibility is the name of the game when it comes to platform engineering because you have a lot of various different needs that you're trying to hit. And while we're at it, we'll just go ahead with the last slide, which is icons that platform engineers would understand, part 2. But go ahead, Catano.
I was just going to say, since you're touching on kind of the open alignment there, and common tooling and whatnot, and dovetailing on your conversation about what we do for the CNCF and whatnot, the story of how this came to be, I think, is kind of important too. Like, if you think about what our brand and culture around aligning to open technologies comes from the creation of how Kubernetes was made, right? So Google has all these services that they want to sell. They needed a ubiquitous framework for runtime and tasked a enterprise architect and a program manager with figuring that out. So they made something, they open sourced it. We started contributing to it. They spun off into something called Heptio and really did a good job of being able to provide enterprise grade support for open source projects. And ultimately, over a couple of years, once we purchased Heptio as VMware, we were able to do the same thing and integrate that. So the culture comes from the exact use case of why it was created in the first place. And it took a while, but now you can actually see that reflected in the product itself here. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that because I don't know who else can do Kubernetes better than the organization that's directly aligned with how it was created.
Well, and that
Also
kind of
just
that really hits one of the we were discussing this the other day. Brian and we were talking about this in particular was we take for granted everybody in the entire Kubernetes community takes for granted a lot of the things that have been in there forever, and we try to treat them as like a core part. Like Harbor is a perfect example. Like Harbor, it's ubiquitous with it, and then to realize, oh, VMware actually wrote that in 2014, like 12 years ago. We wrote this, incorporated, included in the product set to where we don't think about it as something that VMware wrote. It's just something that's part of CNCF, part of the community. It's part of the product. And just that ubiquitous nature of how deeply threaded we are with the capabilities in there kind of make it hey, maybe the answer isn't, this bright and shiny that I saw, again, on Reddit or somewhere else. Maybe the answer actually will be in the context of VKS. Sorry, go ahead, Will and Chris. I know you guys have
no
some
worries.
notes there.
I just wanted to like really hammer on the CNCF conformant Kubernetes, right? Like this is a huge misconception, I think, and maybe not even a misconception, but it's not known to a lot of folks, a lot of customers. Like they think when they hear VKS, it's some proprietary thing. And our naming over time has not helped with this, with changes between TKG and it being Tanzu and VCF and all of these things, right? Like there's been a lot of confusion with what the products are. But like when we talk about VKS, we are talking about specifically upstream CNCF conformant Kubernetes on demand. Like you want Kubernetes just like you want it in Azure or AWS or GCP with their services like AKS, EKS, GKE. That's what VKS is. People don't go out and generally say, I need to deploy my own Kubernetes on top of Google because GKE exists. VKS exists for the same reason, and the clusters that you get from it are pure upstream Kubernetes, right? That's what they are. You have full admin to them. You can install anything you want in them, and it's right there on demand for you to use, right? Like, and platform engineers specifically generally don't think of VMware or something like that as an area they play in. They're like, hey, I got some virtual machines maybe, and I go install things on them. But like VKS is just an API and also a very good API because it's a Kubernetes native API to get Kubernetes clusters, right? Like, but it's all conformant Kubernetes. It's a long way to say this is all conformant Kubernetes.
Yeah. And that kind of is a good segue. And this is the last slide that I have. And then, I want to make sure, by the way, that there's a lot of good people who did a lot of work on the study that is adding the context here. So I want to make sure that if anybody has, I'm not looking at the Q&A because it would distract me while I'm talking. I definitely want to like join in and help out with the Q&A answers. But let's just round this out and come to the end of this and ensure that we're busting one of the last myths, which is what is the benefit and what is the competitive advantage that we have, particularly with this CNCF conformant implementation? I think we should have a drinking game where the number of times that we on the panelists say CNCF conformant, then you have to, drink. And if coffee is fine too. You don't have to. It's kind of early where a lot of you are, but one of the big questions I also get, and I have my own opinions that I'll somewhat keep to myself, but I have platform engineers who will say stuff like, do you support Ansible or do you support Terraform or all these other things? And that's really the wrong question. We are the API endpoint. So we are over here on the right. And this is another big myth and a big thing that I talk about endlessly when it comes to like talking to platform engineers who know what they're doing and know what they want. Their big concern, and I totally understand it, is well, like, okay, well, now I got to change my repo or I've got to change my insert CI/CD pipeline tool here or whatever. This is an example and Will might have some things because Will, I stole this slide from you, well, quite literally. But the example really is ultimately we are over here as the API endpoint. You don't have to come in and start ripping and replacing all these other things that lead up to that. I've seen customers, and I'm not saying with that it's without its work, but I've seen customer keep all to most of this intact and simply realign their API call with our platform. That is why the CNCF conformant part is very, very important. I would say that the biggest competitive advantage that we have is, and I'm going to start this with a question, could you do all of this stuff before if you were running what we'll call legacy, what we'll call vSphere only? Could you do this on just like the old school vSphere platform? It is a trick and leading question. The answer is yes.
Yeah,
I
we
know that.
discussed this when we first
Yeah.
announced VKS in its form last year, right?
Yeah.
So that's not a new question or conversation to us, but
Yeah.
absolutely.
I know this because I did it. Okay. So you could have done this previously, but it was very messy because what you would have to do is I would have to have an API call that went out to some separate storage platform. I'd have an API call that went out to some separate network platform. I'd have an API call that went out to some, and so on. So it was, I'd have to have another one that went out to like monitoring or, whatever. The advantage that you have with VCF is that since it is a private cloud offering with an API endpoint, in this case with VKS, your number of API calls and the sheer lines of code actually get very diminished to where it's a much more simplified methodology of providing platforms to other people. So, for example, our management and monitoring platform in the form of operations, in most cases, and this is easily planned for and easily coded out, it will automatically register itself into monitoring right off the bat. And that's just one example. So those are the advantages that you have with what we're doing. But I want to bring home, and I'll shut up now and let other people talk, which is, can we use all these other things? And the answer is yes. This list back here is just the things that we provide and support. Can you use, Artifactory? Absolutely, 100%. And a lot of times you may not necessarily need to change too much. Can we use any of these other things? Can I use Jenkins and whatnot? The answer is all of the above, yes. So I just want to make sure that people understand that you don't have to like reinvent everything from the ground up to be able to run our platform, and that's the whole point. And that's by design. That is all I have.
Quick point. A couple good questions out there. So one of them, well, you already answered it. How long do we have to wait for the latest Kubernetes version to be supported on the platform? Will answered about 2 months behind upstream release. So again, there's a lot of value. There's a lot of hardening that happens, a lot of simplification and consolidation of tooling. And again, fully supported within about 2 months behind upstream.
I want to talk about that 2 months thing as well, because that's kind of part of this is a question I get. Broadcom acquired VMware 2 years ago, right? And part of that was like, it's going to make things different. And absolutely, on day one, it actually made things different. And I would say, I mean, back in the day, VKS, or what it was called at the time, was about 6 months, 6 to 9 months behind when it came to releases. So when it came to like, oh, I want to update my stuff, like, yeah, you will eventually. So some of the changes around that is like Chris just said, hey, now it's 2 months. Chris and Bill said, yeah, now we're down to about 2 months. So and the other question is, are investments going to be made into the products inside the portfolio, like VKS, containers, and all the rest of the pieces? And that has been a definitive absolutely. Things have been in massive strides, massive updates, and great investments to make things better, which you kind of see out of the results of this study. Click the resources button. Anyone who knew it joined. The
There is, by the way,
study.
Yeah, there is a blog post, by the way, on two things. And maybe this is another follow-up or something. Maybe one of us can kind of scrounge up. That 2 months is actually the second fastest. There was another platform that only
I
beat
just
us.
posted it.
Yeah,
Right in the
it
chat.
only on average it only beats us by like 2 days. So let's just say that we're kind of tied for first, and we'll round up in the fastest. But we are also in that same article. It talks about the fact that we have the lengthiest support cycle for Kubernetes out of anybody also. So it gives you the most flexibility and the most time to be able to like go to the next level depending
Mm-hmm.
on what you're doing with those Kubernetes implementations. So I guess I did my homework on that front.
You did good on that, man. You did good
Yeah, I
on
do
that.
my
And
best.
I'll highlight for a moment to encourage. Let me go. Let me click my share button. Let's see. Will I share the correct screen? We're about to find out. You guys can see this, right? That shows this study here. So this is the 6-page brief of the study. You guys are able to see that, correct? So the 6-page brief, which I include some citations inside my article I put on LinkedIn, and this kind of cover off on some of these things. And it's 6 pages, right? Hey, how much faster is on Postgres? You know, how it operates on this OLTP workload or such like that, right? And then it's backed by this 26-page guide, so you can actually dig into the deeper parts on it. But one of the questions I'll get on this is, oh, you did it on Postgres and this. Well, what about my application? What about the one I care about? Like, yeah, give it a try. When it comes to doing a study, you gotta choose. You gotta choose where you start, right? People choose a thing, and in this particular case, these happen to be the ones that were chosen, and thus the fruits of the study here. Which again, we're not gonna read the study and go out like line by line and information for you. That's why we provide those resources you can easily get to. But then you feed that into the admin study that was done of, hey, how much easier administration may be on this platform versus kind of doing things in a very bare metal or ad hoc capacity. And even this one was included in there, which was the VCF versus bare metal itself. So I'm going to stop those parts. Again, those are all down there in the resources, and they are truly great resources to kind of get you to ask questions of yourself and your infrastructure. Hey, how does this make sense? Does this make sense? I already own it, so why shouldn't I leverage it at that point or something along those lines? Now I know, Chris, you've been on this blog. You used to be the Tanzu guy for like a trillion years. You've got stories and messages and just conversations you've had with CEOs and other stuff like that. You want to share some of that true guidance and knowledge that you've had over time? I know we've discussed that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in general, depending on who you're talking to, different things matter to different folks. So if I'm talking to executives, they're going to want, risk reduction. They're going to want cost optimization, velocity. If we're talking to platform folks, they're going to want to not be on support calls over the weekend when things are breaking, right? And so I think going back to all of the conversations that have come to this, it's all about really trying to support each and every person within the organization. And so what we've done by putting VKS as a first-class citizen into vSphere is being able to leverage all the goodness we have. Like, there isn't anything out there better than DRS, right? In terms of resource scheduling, there's, an automation and self-service portal where we can rapidly build out clusters and have a self-service consumption plan for different teams. Multi-tenancy is another big one. And so when you look at all of the things and iterations that the public cloud has given to organizations and now being able to bring that on premises, it's kind of the best of both worlds there. And it's not always going to be an all or nothing, right? There's obviously hybrid, there's other things out there. But one of the things that, going back to your point through all these conversations, is being able to give people choice and options, and aligning those to value proposition, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing here in the 9 release that's out there, and soon to be 9.1 at some point in time here in the near future. One other thing I'll add is we're using it. We have baked it into our own products, right? So as the private AI guy, one of the things that we do, which is really cool, is we deploy a backend cluster of VKS to run model endpoints. And that is really, really nice because 1, we have an API gateway. 2, we have horizontal and vertical scale of models very quickly with, load balancing and all kinds of good stuff. And again, we can templatize these things and we can provide them with whatever role-based authentication, however you want to give your access and authorization to the teams that are out there that are looking to consume them. So not only is it a service that we provide to our customers to consume, it's also a service that we're consuming within our platform itself. and that is all automated and abstracted away from the user. But it's just another area where we're investing and eating our own, drinking our own champagne, so to speak.
I'm just
I
digging through some. Yeah, go ahead,
I
Bryan.
think the one, yeah, it's cool. I think the one thing that I want to bring home back again, and this is both on the topics of bare metal versus virtualized platform, and then also the ease of management, right? I remember, and I probably joined in some of the Reddit forums myself back in 2017. So this argument about bare metal Kubernetes versus, Kubernetes on a virtualized platform of whatever kind, let's just call it VMware. That argument would be a valid thing to argue about if the year was 2017.
Mhm.
Ultimately, what happened is all things being weighed, the ease of management, particularly on our platform, won out over any sort of minimal to tiny, perceived change in performance on each one of those platforms. So again, I have to keep going back to this whole idea of you have to understand that the long game of platform engineering, you also must consider that ease of management. So, perfect example, and this is one that I use all the time when I talk to customers, is I get a lot of, tiered out different roles. I've been on a call with both platform engineers as well as the quote unquote traditional vSphere admins, and they both have their own fears, insecurities, and desires, and all of that. That is a tough room to be able to meet both of those things usually, but not on our platform. It's actually pretty straightforward because due to the fact that it is virtualized and due to the fact that we have a lot of either built-in things that have been around forever, but also from the ground up, we've built that in mind. You have a lot of traditional VI admins who are like, hey man, I really just want to focus on the infrastructure. I'm not really interested in learning Kubernetes. I'm busy enough as it is. We have the capability of allowing for you to continue to do that. One of the big examples is when you create a namespace in VKS, that is a namespace that platform engineers and people who know Kubernetes are going to find very, very familiar. Within the UI in vSphere, that is a resource pool. So you would manage that normally as you would any other vSphere object. And you can RBAC all of this out to where if you want to continue to stay in your lane as a want to stay in your lane as a traditional vSphere admin, you can continue to do that and allow for the platform engineers to worry about the Kubernetes piece in the long run as well. And that's just one example. So when we start talking about ease of use and this whole idea of like think about the fact that you now really have minimal to no need to like train new talent on that. If you already have platform engineers, it's a simple matter of getting the supervisor up and running. Then it's a matter of RBACing that out, and then you allow for them to go ahead and build that platform for the developers just like you would any other Kubernetes implementation. So I think that that's a very important thing to talk about because again, if you take a look at the simple stuff like the architecture triad of like, insert three things, performance, cost, and ease of use, right? A lot of people be like, well, pick two. Or, as you do with these other two things, you go away from this other one. Those are all things to consider when you start doing design and whatnot. And, performance, yeah, maybe one of those things. But you really need to look at all of those various items and pick the one that's best for the implementation. And I can tell you right now that as far as cost is concerned, this is a thing that you could do tomorrow if you have vSphere 8 U3. Again, I would talk to your account teams and people like Will Arroyo to ensure the long game of being able to move forward in 9 and 9.1. But as far as the feature base and the current iteration of that, these are all things that you probably have right now, just may not have known. So,
Well, Bryan, this
Look at
reminds
your
me of the conversation I've been having back since 2005, pre-2005, but in particular 2005, I did the math. It was hard math. 21 years ago, I've been having this conversation of we can't virtualize SQL, we can't virtualize Oracle because it won't perform. It needs to be bare metal. I've been having that 2004. Okay, maybe yeah, it wasn't great. Since 2005, it's been amazing. And that's we'll have that. People will dig their heels in. It's been the dialogue and the story. They move roles around, but it's that, oh, I can't do this, or I can do it, but I can do it on a different vendor. Has always been an interesting conversation for a trillion years, in which, I mean, I've been talking about this for over 20 years, and that's scary math between. Will, I stopped you from talking. Go ahead.
That's all right. One thing I wanted to call out is what Brian's hitting on is like the ecosystem and the integrations. A lot of like you're kind of touching on it, and that's the thing of like when you talk about namespaces and the integration with vSphere, um, resource pools, and all these things about like how VKS and like Supervisor in this case kind of natively exists within the VCF ecosystem. And VKS also is part of that, but also other services like the private AI services that Chris was talking about, like Data Services Manager. All of these are utilizing that same kind of model that we're using to deploy VKS to bring more services into your VCF ecosystem, right? And like when I go out to a cloud like AWS, I expect to have services. And one of the values of using something like EKS in AWS is that I can integrate with those other services. Like it's a native service to the cloud, right? And VKS being a native service to the cloud, plus having these other native services like DSM, private AI services, the VM service, right? That's a huge one in here. Like there's secret store service, there's Argo CD, there's all these things that we're utilizing this kind of model, this modern, let's call it services model within VCF that are all kind of built upon the supervisor and ultimately a Kubernetes API. That's allowing those platform engineers to come in and get services that they need on demand, like a database, like private AI services, like a VM, like a Kubernetes cluster, like an Argo CD instance. All of this stuff can be basically created with a simple API call using a Kubernetes API, which these platform engineers are super familiar with and love. And the entire ecosystem has tools that work with the Kubernetes API, Ansible, Terraform, Pulumi, like go down the list. Everybody integrates with Kubernetes. So you don't need some custom tool to integrate with the API. But then at the higher level, as like a cloud admin or somebody that's not necessarily wanting to interact with Kubernetes on a day-to-day basis, this stuff has native UIs for it and all of these components. So we're really kind of have like two models of consumption within this and management, but really the integration of this is kind of my point here in that all of these components that integrate nicely and tightly into a cloud make VKS better than just like, hey, I deployed some Kubernetes on virtual machines.
Well, I want to touch on that, especially when we talk about those native clouds, right? It is, and Brian mentioned this at the beginning, but anyone who missed it, it's exactly this. Hey, I'm not going to do VKS. I don't want to run my container stack on a virtual platform. I'm going to do GKE, EKS, AKS because it's bare metal. No, it's not. No, it's also virtual over there. It's just you're paying them for it to be virtual. And that's one of the common things of, hey, I can get bare metal over here. There are ways you can get bare metal. You pay for it, right? But just that acknowledgement of, hey, I'm not going to virtualize this. I'm going to go over here. And nope, you're also virtualizing it over there. So just one of those common myth conceptions, those items that people don't necessarily realize or think about. And I just like to raise an awareness on that because that let's just keep it in house. Well, to that point as well as keeping the things in house allows you to have your own data integrity around it, not just integrity, but availability and privacy around some of those items that you don't have to. Well, you get into the tax, right? Oh, I moved all my stuff over here, so I have to move more of it, so I minimize my ingress egress, and suddenly it becomes very bulk. Whereas typically infrastructure that you maintain, own and operate inside your own infrastructure, you are not handling ingress egress. It's assumed, it's inferred. Your IPs are free. There's no, Route 53 or other pieces that you need to be involved in there. So all those add-on costs beyond the scope of initially deploying a one piece typically, are within your own shores, except if you do like heavy cost and change management, cost management, such like that. But if you're not doing a lot of showback, chargeback, all of your costs are effectively equal inside home infrastructure.
I can keep going.
There was a
Go ahead, Carla.
question I think that's worth bringing up also in chat. John
Mm.
said, speaking of integration, I'm using vDefend for microseg on VMs. Can VKS integrate into that same system? For example, using labels for manifests. This is an awesome topic. Literally like 2 hours ago, I did a demo on this with a customer. Um, but like, yes, the answer is yes. There's multiple layers of integration, and it's super cool. Everything from like, hey, I want to use the traditional DFW to say I want to use like literally labels from my Kubernetes clusters to attach the VMs of those Kubernetes clusters into groups and do microseg across them. Also, if you're using the VM service, the VMs that are provisioned, also all the labels become tags in NSX. So now you have like virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters, both provisioned by the supervisor side by side, able to do that. And then further, you have Antrea integration inside of the clusters that allow you to do that microseg and push down rules from vDefend into the clusters as Antrea policy. So like there's
Mm.
super tight integrations there. Like it's another perfect example of this where and like setting that up is literally flipping on a flag in the when you deploy a VKS cluster to say enable Antrea integration to NSX. Like that's it. It's done.
And John Scholes put out a John Scholes, I think it's johnscholes.com, put out a blog post just recently, like in the last week, around Antrea and integrations that's worth looking at. But I want to highlight on something that we're kind of touching on this. It's kind of comes back on these things. Brian talked about it. Can I deploy VKS on my 803 environment today? Absolutely. And sometimes some of the feedback on that may come on is, yeah, I want to do it on 803 because I can't go to 9. And often why can't we go to 9? Oh, well, our hardware doesn't support 9, right? And the reason I bring that up is 2 weeks now. It was February 13th, so it's 13 days ago. We've updated new guidance on expanded support for Cascade Lake and other chipsets. So it's absolutely worth looking because in the last 2 weeks, hardware that you thought might not be 9 capable might be 9 capable today, both from VMware Broadcom as well as from the individual vendors themselves. So the expansion of oh wow, now I can take that stuff to 9 because I might be vSphere vCenter 8 today. That was often a sticking point of their adoption of VCF 9, vSphere 9, basically. So that's one that you can start taking advantage of all the VKS type of capabilities, of which there are so many, tied into automation, tied into the network security, and all those kind of elements and components that are on there. I want to note we've got just a few minutes left. So, Will, Chris, Brian, your last kind of stuff before I eventually kill you guys on this.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the VM service, because the VM service is another thing I'm very passionate about. So I'll try to make it quick, but the VM service is an additional thing that you get with the supervisor, because remember way back in like slide 3 that I showed, I said the supervisor unlocks a bunch of different things, including VKS. And this is going back to that whole idea of integration and having things that you would expect. Traditional VMware vSphere engineers have been creating VMs the same way for over 20 years. I have a VM, I create a template, I right-click the template, I create a virtual machine from that, right? What's the problem? Well, templates typically have a tendency of proliferating, and now I have 3 and 4 different templates. They have to be maintained manually, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? The platform engineering methodology for maintaining all of that is to use image-based automation. So I build one image, Ubuntu OS, call it your base image or your standard image or whatever. I build one of them, and then I actually allow for other people to automate that process. So through VCF automation under the hood, I'm getting so excited, my headgear's falling out. But you have with the VCF automation, VKS, and all the things that you have under the hood. I've done demos where I've showed customers like this is what it looks like to go create something out in EK or in AWS, create a virtual machine out in AWS. They go out and they can do it in minutes. Well, the idea is we can provide that same level of service with a standard methodology for doing it. As a matter of fact, the UI is built in a way to where you can go through, click drop downs, or you can code it out through an API, just like you could in any cloud. And typically I go through and I have some skeptics that, they have the furrowed brow as they go through it, and then they see this thing cloud in it, which again is another standard. That's not a VMware thing. That is a standard thing that platform engineers know everywhere. And I get to the cloud init part of the demo, and they're like, dude, you should have led with that, man. I know that. I know how that works. So now they have the image, the t-shirt size. They go through and they do the cloud init or sysprep if you're doing Windows, for example. And so we're leveraging the Kubernetes API to allow for virtual machine creation, and the experience is meant to be the same. We're having people, because of this capability that we are providing, we're having people start to repatriate their workloads because it's more expensive to run in the public cloud. And we have the same experience on-prem now, and that holy grail has been a thing that, a lot of the different vendors have been trying to recreate on-prem for a really long time. It's a reality now. That's the VM service.
Chris, any last parting words and thoughts for us?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. You mentioned reach out to your account teams a couple of times. There's a lot that we're doing with our customers in terms of roadmaps, alignment. We have architectural workshops that we can do. We have path to production workshops we can do. So just know that, great webinar. It doesn't end here. If you want to find out more information, or if you're looking at pulling your adventure forward or accelerating your efforts currently, reach out to your account teams. There's a lot of things that are different being with Broadcom now, and one of those is that we really do a lot of collaborative work, and we do a lot of planning together. And the more involved you are with us, the better everything is. So would encourage you to please reach out to your account managers and take advantage of some of the opportunities you have there.
Well,
Well,
will you not take us out, but any last other parts before?
Yeah, I'm gonna, if there's one thing you're gonna take away, or one thing I'm gonna say to end this from my end, is VKS is upstream CNCF conformant Kubernetes. Keep that in mind.
I will. I'm gonna do one last rando screen share for a moment, which if my share button works, I think I'm overheating. It's to say that check out the hands-on labs, because if you don't have the wherewithal, or you don't have the access to do it immediately, and this is a link that should work to show just a few, getting started with automation, getting started with supervisors, getting started with VKS and such like that. And I will say I did my VKS VCAP recently, so the test is out. So you can gladly go take your VCP VKS or your VCAP VKS. So those are available on the horizon. But I'm gonna end it for y'all in a moment, but we're gonna keep it open long enough for us to respond to some of these amazing questions that are coming up in the Q&A.
I do have one question I can answer live.
Absolutely,
I didn't
Bryan.
quit it because I just noticed somebody mentioned Red Hat, OpenShift, and KubeVirt, which I would yeah I would be remiss if I didn't at least tackle that for the record. And I won't really kind of go into naming names, but there's a big movement now for competing products to actually pull virtual machine workloads away from VMware using KubeVirt. What I can say about KubeVirt is really going back to what I said earlier about the skill set that you have on hand, and the fact that we allow for people to continue to stay in their lanes if they want, or go out of them if they want. If you have a traditional vSphere engineer who wants to get ramped up in Kubernetes, they certainly have the power to do that given the time, right? But what I've found, as somebody who keeps a wandering eye on what's going on with the competition, it is really part of my job, is that has been met with very, very limited success so far. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that if you are somebody who is a traditional virtualization engineer, you now need to know Kubernetes to be able to implement that particular thing. And that is KubeVirt. So if you're looking at comparative costs and whatnot, I've seen a lot of customers who are like, okay, well, we're going to change platforms altogether. Well, that means, okay, well, don't have the density that we have. There's another study that proves that out. So there's additional hardware purchase. if you say, okay, well, we're just going to hire new people, there are a lot of platform engineers who have no real interest in being virtualization engineers anymore. They've moved on. There's the, as far as like, somebody's paycheck and salary, a lot of those engineers have moved on to platform engineers. So you're going to pay a pretty penny for somebody to do virtualization administration nowadays. So I felt like I needed to kind of say that as far as the implementation. We encourage people to look around, and usually they end up coming back because of all the things that we've all been saying. So I'll shut up now.
No,
We're
you've
at
been
time.
amazing. You guys have all been amazing, and especially you, those who are have stayed on this long. It is time to wrap it up. We are at the hour. We appreciate you guys all being here, and again, all the amazing questions. We do this for you. And it gives us a chance to get together. But we'll definitely get a lot of these resources out. Check for a lot of the things we discussed today and or links. Though I'll put out a follow-up post article out on LinkedIn. But with that, I'm going to end it for y'all. I appreciate you guys being here. Let me find my button, and thanks you all.